Brisbane is Australia's third largest city, and it has Australia's third largest railway network, with about 154 stations across about 12 lines, and with about 150 million boardings per year across the transport network. I say about because the way Queensland classifies its Brisbane suburban train lines can be a bit inconsistent, and they often lump other nearby cities like the Gold Coast or Sunshine Coast in with it. But with that said, Australia's third biggest railway network is about to get a bit bigger, and that's thanks to Brisbane's Cross River Rail project, named that way because we'll be adding a new river crossing as well as a few new and upgraded stations to the city's rail network. The project will see the creation of a new 10-kilometre line through the heart of the Brisbane Central Business District or CBD, including the construction of two 5.9-kilometre twin tunnels that will run underneath the Brisbane River. And this is all expected to be completed pretty soon. While it was originally intended to open in 2025, it's now expected to open in 2026, and at a total cost of just over $6 billion. But why is this project needed? Well, to understand that, we need to take a look at Brisbane's rail network as a whole. Like basically all suburban rail systems in Australia, Brisbane's is pretty old, with most of the network being built in the late 1800s and early 1900s, back when Brisbane was a much smaller city than it is today. Since then, however, the city's population has grown by basically an order of magnitude, but the same cannot be said for its railway network. Sure, there have been some additions, like the airport railway line that opened back in 2001, take note Melbourne, but the majority of Brisbane is still relying on a network built a century ago. Instead, in more recent decades, the city has focused its efforts on building new and bigger roadways to allow the growing population to get around. This meant decades of ever-increasing road traffic, while rail and public transport usage stagnated if not decreased. But this trend has started to change in recent years, and public transport patronage across Australian cities has begun to grow again, which has started putting more and more pressure on our rail networks that, again, are often more than a century old. In Brisbane's case, the business case for the Cross River Rail project found that this growing demand could lead to most of the city's rail lines experiencing severe overcrowding by as soon as 2026, if nothing is done to expand the network capacity. Part of the reason for this, and one of the key reasons for the Cross River Rail project, is that there are some pretty substantial railway bottlenecks in the Brisbane CBD. And while these might not have been much of an issue 100 years ago, these days they significantly limit the number of trains that can run through the city. The first major bottleneck is that while Brisbane might have about 12 train lines, in the CBD they all have to share just 2 pairs of tracks. This 4-track section runs from Roma Street Station on the CBD's west, through Brisbane Central and out of the east side of the CBD to Fortitude Valley and Bowen Hills. Currently, every Brisbane suburban train service runs across these 4 tracks, so you can imagine that they get pretty busy, especially during peak hours. The second major bottleneck is across the Brisbane River, which only has 2 rail crossings on the suburban network, of which only one is close to the city. This crossing is the Maryvale Bridge, and its single pair of tracks is responsible for carrying the Cleveland, Beenleigh, and Gold Coast lines. So again, you can see why capacity might be an issue here. And this is where the Cross River Rail project comes in. It will run an additional pair of tracks through the Brisbane CBD, in effect boosting the potential rail capacity running through the city by 50%. It will also provide an additional inner-city rail crossing under the Brisbane River, which will double the potential capacity for inner-city rail travel from Brisbane's southern suburbs. The new tracks being built as part of Cross River Rail will start just after Dutton Park Station on the Beenleigh and Gold Coast lines, where they will duck underground for a new station at Boggo Road. Boggo Road is located pretty close to the existing Park Road train station, where it will provide an interchange with the Cleveland line as well as the nearby busway. After this, it will head east to a new station at Woolloongabba, home to the famous Gabba Stadium, before turning north and crossing beneath the Brisbane River towards another new station in the heart of the Brisbane CBD at Albert Street. This new station will provide a more direct connection with the southern part of the city, including the Queensland University of Technology, than the existing Brisbane Central Station that sits in the CBD's north. After Albert Street, the line continues north to the existing Roma Street station, where 2 new underground platforms are being built, and where the line will provide an interchange with all of Brisbane's other suburban rail lines. Now, what you don't see on this map is that there are extra sets of tracks that loop from the western side of Roma Street station around to where Bowen Hills station is. These lines aren't currently used for any regular suburban train operations, with the exception of during the Royal Queensland Show, also called the Ekka, where a special event service runs to the only station on these tracks, Exhibition. However, this is going to change thanks to Cross River Rail, because after Roma Street, the line is going to go back above ground and join these tracks, where it will run to an upgraded Exhibition station, which will finally get regular all-year-round service. Then finally, after Exhibition, these existing tracks rejoin the rest of Brisbane's railways just past Bowen Hills station, and from here trains will be able to run onto either the Redcliffe Peninsula or Sunshine Coast lines. Speaking of the Sunshine Coastline, I recently did another video dedicated to that topic, including a pretty interesting new extension being added to it. I'll put a link on screen if you want to see more. That said, when the project is complete, Brisbane's railway network is going to start looking a little different. I already mentioned that, using the new tracks provided by Cross River Rail, the Beenleigh and Gold Coast lines will get a direct connection with the Sunshine Coast and Redcliffe lines. But there will also be changes to the other lines using the existing 2 pairs of tracks already running through the Brisbane CBD. The first pair will be used to connect up the Rosewood and Springfield lines with the Airport and Shorncliffe lines, while the second pair will connect the Cleveland line with the Ferny Grove line. Then, as far as existing lines go, that just leaves the Exhibition line and the Doomben line. By the looks of things, the Doomben line isn't changing and will keep running on its existing route from Doomben to Roma Street. The Exhibition line, on the other hand, seems like it will cease to exist, as its sole purpose, to connect Exhibition Station up with the rest of the rail network, will now be done by the lines using the Cross River Rail track. But this all means that each pair of CBD tracks will now be shared by fewer lines, which should help make the train network more reliable, as an issue on one line will be less likely to affect the other lines it doesn't share track with. And most importantly, it should allow for more capacity, as each pair of tracks will now have extra space for its lines to run additional trains, especially during busy peak periods when the capacity is needed the most. Or is it? Well, there is no doubt that the railway network is at its busiest during peak commuter hours, but the amount of people travelling during peak hours still hasn't recovered to the levels it was at before the pandemic, which was when this project started. In fact, it's off-peak travel, such as travel on the weekends, that has seen some of the strongest post-COVID recoveries. For people travelling during the off-peak, overcrowding because not enough trains can run through the CBD isn't an issue. Instead, the issue is that there simply are not enough trains running full stop. At the start of this video, I mentioned that along with being the 3rd biggest city in the country, Brisbane has the 3rd busiest public transport network. But when we look at that statistic on a per capita basis, the story changes, and Brisbane goes from 3rd all the way down to 5th, behind even Perth and Adelaide. So even though Brisbane has about twice as many train stations as Perth does, they're each getting used far less than the ones in Perth. One of the main reasons for this is that, especially outside of peak hours, Brisbane's railway network has some pretty poor frequencies. In Perth, basically every station on the network gets a train at least every 15 minutes during off-peak. In contrast, in Brisbane, waits of half an hour or more are not uncommon. This makes catching the train in Perth relatively convenient, because travellers can just turn up and go, and as a result people are at least slightly more likely to choose the train or public transport instead of driving. In Brisbane, where off-peak frequencies are much poorer, if you want to catch the train you often need to plan it out using the timetable, and if you get there too late, well, you might have to wait quite a while for the next one. So it becomes too much of a hassle and people just turn to the much more convenient car. Now, don't get me wrong, even though the Cross River Rail project is likely not going to be needed quite as urgently as it was before the pandemic, Brisbane's population is still growing fast, and that extra capacity can definitely be made the most of. But while it will let Brisbane run more trains during peak hours, Brisbane should take this opportunity to boost frequencies during the off-peak as well, something that can even be done with the current infrastructure before this project is complete. With more frequent trains during peak hours, as well as throughout the rest of the day, Brisbane could not only improve the system for the commuters who use it today, but bring in new types of people making more diverse trip types. Ultimately, Cross River Rail will provide important new infrastructure that will play a key role in future-proofing Brisbane's railway network. But we don't need to wait for it to be complete to start boosting off-peak frequencies across the network, in order to make the rail network a convenient form of transport for people who aren't just 9-to-5 commuters. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider giving it a like and subscribing if you aren't already. I'm City Moose, and as always, thanks for watching.